Welcome to the Nerdjacker's Codex Vault. Today we are reading Works of Mencius, Volume 1, by Chinese philosopher Mencius, translated by James Legge. Part 1. King Hui of Liang. Mencius went to see King Hui of Liang. The king said, "Venerable sir, since you have not counted it far to come here, a distance of 1,000 li, may I presume that you are provided with counsels to profit my kingdom?" Mencius replied, "Why must your majesty use that word profit? What I am provided with are counsels to benevolence and righteousness, and these are my only topics. If your majesty say, 'What is to be done to profit my kingdom?' the great officers will say, 'What is to be done to profit our families?' And the inferior officers and the common people will say, 'What is to be done to profit our persons?' Superiors and inferiors will try to snatch this profit the one from the other, and the kingdom will be endangered. In the kingdom of 10,000 chariots, the murderer of his sovereign shall be the chief of a family of 1,000 chariots. In the kingdom of 1,000 chariots, the murderer of his prince shall be the chief of a family of 100 chariots. To have 1,000 in 10,000 and 100 in 1,000 cannot be said not to be a large allotment, but if righteousness be put last and profit be put first, they will not be satisfied without snatching all. There never has been a benevolent man who neglected his parents. There never has been a righteous man who made his sovereign an after consideration. Let your majesty also say, benevolence and righteousness, and let these be your only themes. Why must you use that word, profit?" Mencius, another day, saw King Hui of Liang. The king went and stood with him by a pond, and looking round at the large geese and deer, said, "Do wise and good princes also find pleasure in these things?" Mencius replied, "Being wise and good, they have pleasure in these things. If they are not wise and good, though they have these things, they do not find pleasure. It is said in the book of poetry, 'He measured out and commenced his marvelous tower. He measured it out and planned it. The people addressed themselves to it, and in less than a day completed it. When he measured and began it, he said to them, Be not so earnest,' but the multitudes came as if they had been his children. The king was in his marvelous park. The does reposed about, the does so sleek and fat, and the white birds came glistening. The king was by his marvelous pond. How full was it of fishes leaping about! King Wan used the strength of the people to make his tower and his pond, and yet the people rejoiced to do the work, calling the tower the marvelous tower, calling the pond the marvelous pond, and rejoicing that he had his large deer, his fishes, and turtles. The ancients caused the people to have pleasure as well as themselves, and therefore they could enjoy it. In the Declaration of Tang it is said, "O son, when wilt thou expire? We will die together with thee." The people wished for Chie's death, though they should die with him. Although he had towers, ponds, birds, and animals, how could he have pleasure alone? King Hui of Liang said, "Small as my virtue is, in the government of my kingdom, I do indeed exert my mind to the utmost. If the year be bad on the inside of the river, I remove as many of the people as I can to the east of the river and convey grain to the country in the inside. When the year is bad on the east of the river, I act on the same plan. On examining the government of the neighboring kingdoms, I do not find that there is any prince who exerts his mind as I do. And yet the people of the neighboring kingdoms do not decrease, nor do my people increase. How is this?" Mencius replied, "Your majesty is fond of war. Let me take an illustration from war. The soldiers move forward to the sound of the drums, and after their weapons have been crossed on one side they throw away their coats of mail, trail their arms behind them, and run. Some run 100 paces and stop. Some run 50 paces and stop. What would you think if those who run 50 paces were to laugh at those who run 100 paces? The kind said, they should not do so. Though they did not run 100 paces, yet they also ran away." "Since your majesty knows this," replied Mencius, "you need not hope that your people will become more numerous than those of the neighboring kingdoms. If the seasons of husbandry be not interfered with, the grain will be more than can be eaten. If close nets are not allowed to enter the pools and ponds, the fishes and turtles will be more than can be consumed. If the axes and bills enter the hills and forests only at the proper time, the wood will be more than can be used. When the grain and fish and turtles are more than can be eaten, and there is more wood than can be used. This enables the people to nourish their living and mourn for their dead without any feeling against any. This condition, in which the people nourish their living and bury their dead without any feeling against any, is the first step of royal government. Let mulberry trees be planted about the homesteads with their 5 mao, and persons of 50 years may be clothed with silk. In keeping fowls, pigs, dogs, and swine, let not their times of breeding be neglected, and persons of 70 years may eat flesh. Let there not be taken away the time that is proper for the cultivation of the farm with its 100 ma, and the family of several mouths that is supported by it shall not suffer from hunger. Let careful attention be paid to education in schools, inculcating in it especially the filial and fraternal duties, and gray-haired men will not be seen upon the roads, carrying burdens on their backs or on their heads. It never has been that the ruler of a state, where such results were seen, persons of 70 wearing silk and eating flesh, and the black-haired people suffering neither from hunger nor cold, did not attain to the royal dignity. Your dogs and swine eat the food of men, and you do not make any restrictive arrangements. There are people dying from famine on the roads, and you do not issue the stores of your granaries for them. When people die, you say, "It is not owing to me, it is owing to the year." In what does this differ from stabbing a man and killing him, and then saying, "It was not I, it was the weapon"? Let your majesty cease to lay the blame on the year, and instantly from all the nation the people will come to you. King Hui of Liang said, "I wish quietly to receive your instructions." Mencius replied, "Is there any difference between killing a man with a stick and with a sword?" The king said, "There is no difference." "Is there any difference between doing it with a sword and with the style of government?" "There is no difference," was the reply. Mencius then said, "In your kitchen there is fat meat, in your stables there are fat horses. But your people have the look of hunger, and on the wilds there are those who have died of famine. This is leading on beasts to devour men. Beasts devour one another, and men hate them for doing so. When a prince, being the parent of his people, administers his government so as to be chargeable with leading on beasts to devour men, where is his parental relation to the people?" Chengni said, "Was he not without posterity who first made wooden images to bury with the dead? So he said, because that man made the semblances of men, and used them for that purpose. What shall be thought of him who causes his people to die of hunger?" King Hui of Liang said, "There was not in the nation a stronger state than sin, as you, venerable sir, know. But since it descended to me, on the east we have been defeated by Qi, and then my eldest son perished. On the west we have lost 700 li of territory to Qin, and on the south we have sustained disgrace at the hands of Chu. I have brought shame on my departed predecessors, and wish on their account to wipe it away, once for all. What course is to be pursued to accomplish this?" Mencius replied, "With a territory which is only 100 li square, it is possible to attain to the royal dignity. If your majesty will indeed dispense a benevolent government to the people, being sparing in the use of punishments and fines, and making the taxes and levies light, so causing that the fields shall be plowed deep, and the weeding of them be carefully attended to, and that the strong-bodied, during their days of leisure, shall cultivate their filial piety, fraternal respectfulness, sincerity, and truthfulness, serving thereby at home their fathers and elder brothers, and abroad their elders and superiors. You will then have a people who can be employed, with sticks which they have prepared, to oppose the strong mail and sharp weapons of the troops of Qin and Chu. The rulers of those states rob their people of their time, so that they cannot plow and weed their fields in order to support their parents. Their parents suffer from cold and hunger. Brothers, wives, and children are separated and scattered abroad. Those rulers, as it were, drive their people into pitfalls or drown them. Your majesty will go to punish them. In such a case, who will oppose your majesty? In accordance with this is the saying, 'The benevolent has no enemy.' I beg your majesty not to doubt what I say." Part 2. King Shang of Liang. Mencius went to see the King Shang of Liang. On coming out from the interview, he said to some persons, "When I looked at him from a distance, he did not appear like a sovereign. When I drew near to him, I saw nothing venerable about him. Abruptly he asked me, "How can the kingdom be settled?" I replied, "It will be settled by being united under one sway." "Who can so unite it?" I replied. "He who has no pleasure in killing men can so unite it." "Who can give it to him?" I replied. "All the people of the nation will unanimously give it to him." "Does your majesty understand the way of the growing grain? During the 7th and 8th months, when drought prevails, the plants become dry. Then the clouds collect densely in the heavens. They send down torrents of rain, and the grain erects itself as if by a shoot. When it does so, who can keep it back? Now among the shepherds of men throughout the nation, there is not one who does not find pleasure in killing men. If there were one who did not find pleasure in killing men, all the people in the nation would look towards him with outstretched necks. Such being indeed the case, the people would flock to him as water flows downwards with a rush which no one can repress. The king Xuan of Qi asked, saying, "May I be informed by you of the transactions of Huan of Qi and Wan of Tsin?" Mencius replied, "There were none of the disciples of Chunk Ni who spoke about the affairs of Huan and Wan, and therefore they have not been transmitted to these after ages. Your servant has not heard them. If you will have me speak, let it be about royal government." The king said, "What virtue must there be in order to attain to royal sway?" Mencius answered, "The love and protection of the people. With this there is no power which can prevent a ruler from attaining to it." The king asked again, "Is such an one as I competent to love and protect the people?" Mencius said, "Yes." "How do you know that I am competent for that?" "I heard the following incident from Hu Ho. The king," said he, "was sitting aloft in the hall when a man appeared, leading an ox past the lower part of it. The king saw him and asked, 'Where is the ox going?' The man replied, 'We are going to consecrate a bell with its blood.' The king said, 'Let it go. I cannot bear its frightened appearance, as if it were an innocent person going to the place of death.' The man answered, 'Shall we then omit the consecration of the bell?' The king said, 'How can that be omitted? Change it for a sheep.' I do not know whether this incident really occurred." The king replied, "It did," and then Mencius said, "The heart seen in this is sufficient to carry you to the royal sway. The people all suppose that your majesty grudged the animal, but your servant knows surely that it was your majesty's not being able to bear the sight which made you do as you did." The king said, "You are right, and yet there really was an appearance of what the people condemned. But though Qi be a small and narrow state, how should I grudge one ox? Indeed, it was because I could not bear its frightened appearance, as if it were an innocent person going to the place of death, that therefore I changed it for a sheep." Mencius pursued, "Let not your majesty deem it strange that the people should think you were grudging the animal. When you changed a large one for a small, how should they know the true reason? If you felt pained by its being led without guilt to the place of death, what was there to choose between an ox and a sheep?" The king laughed and said, "What really was my mind in the matter? I did not grudge the expense of it and changed it for a sheep. There was reason in the people's saying that I grudged it." "There is no harm in their saying so," said Mencius. "Your conduct was an artifice of benevolence. You saw the ox and had not seen the sheep. So is the superior man affected towards animals, that, having seen them alive, he cannot bear to see them die. Having heard their dying cries, he cannot bear to eat their flesh. Therefore he keeps away from his slaughterhouse and cookroom." The king was pleased and said, "It is said in the book of poetry, 'The minds of others I am able by reflection to measure.' This is verified, my master, in your discovery of my motive. I indeed did the thing, but when I turned my thoughts inward and examined into it, I could not discover my own mind. When you, master, spoke those words, the movements of compassion began to work in my mind. How is it that this heart has in it what is equal to the royal sway?" Mencius replied, "Suppose a man were to make this statement to your majesty, 'My strength is sufficient to lift 3,000 caddies, but it is not sufficient to lift one feather. My eyesight is sharp enough to examine the point of an autumn hair, but I do not see a wagon load of faggots.' Would your majesty allow what he said?" "No," was the answer, on which Mencius proceeded, "Now here is kindness sufficient to reach to animals, and no benefits are extended from it to the people. How is this? Is an exception to be made here? The truth is, the feather is not lifted, because strength is not used. The wagon load of firewood is not seen, because the eyesight is not used. And the people are not loved and protected, because kindness is not employed. Therefore, your majesty's not exercising the royal sway is because you do not do it, not because you are not able to do it. The king asked, how may the difference between the not doing a thing and the not being able to do it be represented? Mencius replied, in such a thing as taking the Tei mountain under your arm and leaping over the North Sea with it, if you say to people, I am not able to do it, that is a real case of not being able. In such a matter as breaking off a branch from a tree at the order of a superior, if you say to people, I am not able to do it, that is a case of not doing it. It is not a case of not being able to do it. Therefore, your majesty's not exercising the royal sway is not such a case as that of taking the Tei mountain under your arm and leaping over the North Sea with it. Your majesty's not exercising the royal sway is a case like that of breaking off a branch from a tree. Treat with the reverence due to age the elders in your own family, so that the elders in the families of others shall be similarly treated. Treat with the kindness due to youth the young in your own family, so that the young in the families of others shall be similarly treated. Do this, and the kingdom may be made to go round in your palm. It is said in the book of poetry, his example affected his wife. It reached to his brothers, and his family of the state was governed by it. The language shows how King Wan simply took his kindly heart and exercised it towards those parties. Therefore, the carrying out his kindness of heart by a prince will suffice for the love and protection of all within the 4 seas, and if he do not carry it out, he will not be able to protect his wife and children. The way in which the ancients came greatly to surpass other men was no other but this, simply that they knew well how to carry out, so as to affect others, what they themselves did. Now your kindness is sufficient to reach to animals, and no benefits are extended from it to reach the people. How is this? Is an exception to be made here? By weighing, we know what things are light and what heavy. By measuring, we know what things are long and what short. The relations of all things may be thus determined, and it is of the greatest importance to estimate the motions of the mind. I beg your majesty to measure it. You collect your equipments of war, endanger your soldiers and officers, and excite the resentment of the other princes. Do these things cause you pleasure in your mind? The king replied, no. How should I derive pleasure from these things? My object in them is to seek for what I greatly desire. Mencius said, may I hear from you what it is that you greatly desire? The king laughed and did not speak. Mencius resumed, are you led to desire it because you have not enough of rich and sweet food for your mouth? Or because you have not enough of light and warm clothing for your body? Or because you have not enough of beautifully colored objects to delight your eyes? Or because you have not voices and tones enough to please your ears? Or because you have not enough of attendants and favorites to stand before you and receive your orders? Your majesty's various officers are sufficient to supply you with those things. How can your majesty be led to entertain such a desire on account of them? No, said the king, my desire is not on account of them. Mencius added, then what your majesty greatly desires may be known. You wish to enlarge your territories, to have Qin and Chu wait at your court, to rule the Middle Kingdom, and to attract to you the barbarous tribes that surround it. But doing what you do to seek for what you desire is like climbing a tree to seek for fish. The king said, is it so bad as that? It is even worse, was the reply. If you climb a tree to seek for fish, although you do not get the fish, you will not suffer any subsequent calamity. But doing what you do to seek for what you desire, doing it moreover with all your heart, you will assuredly afterwards meet with calamities. The king asked, may I hear from you the proof of that? Mencius said, if the people of Cao should fight with the people of Chu, which of them does your majesty think would conquer? The people of Chu would conquer. Yes, and so it is certain that a small country cannot contend with a great, that few cannot contend with many, that the weak cannot contend with the strong. The territory within the four seas embraces 9 divisions, each of 1,000 li square. All Qi together is but one of them. If with one part you try to subdue the other 8, what is the difference between that and Cao's contending with Chu? For, with such a desire, you must turn back to the proper course for its attainment. Now if your majesty will institute a government whose action shall be benevolent, this will cause all the officers in the kingdom to wish to stand in your majesty's court, and all the farmers to wish to plow in your majesty's fields, and all the merchants, both traveling and stationary, to wish to store their goods in your majesty's marketplaces, and all traveling strangers to wish to make their tours on your majesty's roads, and all throughout the kingdom who feel aggrieved by their rulers to wish to come and complain to your majesty. And when they are so bent, who will be able to keep them back? The king said, I am stupid, and not able to advance to this. I wish you, my master, to assist my intentions. Teach me clearly. Although I am deficient in intelligence and vigor, I will essay and try to carry your instructions into effect. Mencius replied, They are only men of education, who, without a certain livelihood, are able to maintain a fixed heart. As to the people, if they have not a certain livelihood, it follows that they will not have a fixed heart. And if they have not a fixed heart, there is nothing which they will not do in the way of self-abandonment, of moral deflection, of depravity, and of wild license. When they thus have been involved in crime, to follow them up and punish them, this is to entrap the people. How can such a thing as entrapping the people be done under the rule of a benevolent man? Therefore, an intelligent ruler will regulate the livelihood of the people, so as to make sure that, for those above them, they shall have sufficient wherewith to serve their parents, and, for those below them, sufficient wherewith to support their wives and children, that in good years they shall always be abundantly satisfied, and that in bad years they shall escape the danger of perishing. After this he may urge them, and they will proceed to what is good, for in this case the people will follow after it with ease. Now the livelihood of the people is so regulated that above they have not sufficient wherewith to serve their parents, and below they have not sufficient wherewith to support their wives and children. Notwithstanding good years, their lives are continually embittered, and in bad years they do not escape perishing. In such circumstances, they only try to save themselves from death, and are afraid they will not succeed. What leisure have they to cultivate propriety and righteousness? If your majesty wishes to effect this regulation of the livelihood of the people, why not turn to that which is the essential step to it? Let mulberry trees be planted about the homesteads with their 5 mao, and persons of 50 years may be clothed with silk. In keeping fowls, pigs, dogs, and swine, let not their times of breeding be neglected, and persons of 70 years may eat flesh. Let there not be taken away the time that is proper for the cultivation of the farm with its 100 mao, and the family of 8 mouths that is supported by it shall not suffer from hunger. Let careful attention be paid to educatelon in schools, the inculcation in it especially of the filial and fraternal duties, and gray-haired men will not be seen upon the roads, carrying burdens on their backs or on their heads. It never has been that the ruler of a state where such results were seen, the old wearing silk and eating flesh, and the black-haired people suffering neither from hunger nor cold, did not attain to the royal dignity. Part 3. Chuang Pao. Chuang Pao, seeing Mencius, said to him, I had an interview with the king. His Majesty told me that he loved music, and I was not prepared with anything to reply to him. What do you pronounce about that love of music? Mencius replied, If the king's love of music were very great, the kingdom of Qi would be near to a state of good government. Another day, Mencius, having an interview with the king, said, Your Majesty, I have heard, told the officer Chuang, that you love music. Was it so? The king changed color and said, I am unable to love the music of the ancient sovereigns. I only love the music that suits the manners of the present age. Mencius said, If your Majesty's love of music were very great, Qi would be near to a state of good government. The music of the present day is just like the music of antiquity as regards affecting that. The king said, May I hear from you the proof of that? Mencius asked, which is the more pleasant, to enjoy music by yourself alone or to enjoy it with others? To enjoy it with others, was the reply. And which is the more pleasant, to enjoy music with a few or to enjoy it with many? To enjoy it with many. Mencius proceeded, your servant begs to explain what I have said about music to your majesty. Now your majesty is having music here. The people hear the noise of your bells and drums, and the notes of your fifes and pipes, and they all, with aching heads, knit their brows and say to one another, that's how our king likes his music. But why does he reduce us to this extremity of distress? Fathers and sons cannot see one another. Elder brothers and younger brothers, wives and children, are separated and scattered abroad. Now your majesty is hunting here. The people hear the noise of your carriages and horses, and see the beauty of your plumes and streamers, and they all, with aching heads, knit their brows and say to one another, that's how our king likes his hunting. But why does he reduce us to this extremity of distress? Fathers and sons cannot see one another. Elder brothers and younger brothers, wives and children, are separated and scattered abroad. Their feeling thus is from no other reason but that you do not allow the people to have pleasure as well as yourself. Now, your majesty is having music here. The people hear the noise of your bells and drums and the notes of your fifes and pipes, and they all, delighted and with joyful looks, say to one another, that sounds as if our king were free from all sickness. If he were not, how could he enjoy this music? Now, your majesty is hunting here. The people hear the noise of your carriages and horses, and see the beauty of your plumes and streamers, and they all, delighted and with joyful looks, say to one another, that looks as if our king were free from all sickness. If he were not, how could he enjoy this hunting? Their feeling thus is from no other reason but that you cause them to have their pleasure as you have yours. If your majesty now will make pleasure a thing common to the people and yourself, the royal sway awaits you. The king Xuan of Qi asked, was it so that the park of King Wan contained 70 square li? Mencius replied, it is so in the records. Was it so large as that? Exclaimed the king. The people, said Mencius, still looked on it as small. The king added, my park contains only 40 square li, and the people still look on it as large. How is this? The park of King Wan, was the reply, contained 70 square li, but the grass cutters and fuel gatherers had the privilege of entrance into it, so also had the catchers of pheasants and hares. He shared it with the people, and was it not with reason that they looked on it as small? When I first arrived at the borders of your kingdom, I inquired about the great prohibitory regulations before I would venture to enter it, and I heard that inside the barrier gates there was a park of 40 square li, and that he who killed a deer in it was held guilty of the same crime as if he had killed a man. Thus those 40 square li are a pitfall in the middle of the kingdom. Is it not with reason that the people look upon them as large? Part 4. King Xuan of Qi. The king Xuan of Qi asked, saying, is there any way to regulate one's maintenance of intercourse with neighboring kingdoms? Mencius replied, there is, but it requires a perfectly virtuous prince to be able, with a great country, to serve a small one, as for instance Tang served Ko, and King Wan served the Quan barbarians. And it requires a wise prince to be able, with a small country, to serve a large one, as the king Tai served the Xunyu, and Kaoqian served Wu. He who with a Ariat state serves a small one, delights in heaven. He who with a small state serves a large one, stands in awe of heaven. He who delights in heaven will affect with his love and protection the whole kingdom. He who stands in awe of heaven will affect with his love and protection his own kingdom. It is said in the book of poetry, I fear the majesty of heaven, and will thus preserve its favoring decree. The king said, a great saying, but I have an infirmity, I love valor. I beg your majesty, was the reply, not to love small valor. If a man brandishes his sword, looks fiercely, and says, how dare he withstand me? This is the valor of a common man, who can be the opponent only of a single individual. I beg your majesty to greaten it. It is said in the book of poetry, the king blazed with anger, and he marshaled his hosts, to stop the march to Chu, to consolidate the prosperity of Chao, to meet the expectations of the nation. This was the valor of King Wan. King Wan, in one burst of his anger, gave repose to all the people of the kingdom. In the book of history it is said, "Heaven, having produced the inferior people, made for them rulers and teachers, with the purpose that they should be assisting to God, and therefore distinguished them throughout the four quarters of the land. Whoever are offenders, and whoever are innocent, here am I to deal with them. How dare any under heaven give indulgence to their refractory wills?" There was one man pursuing a violent and disorderly course in the kingdom, and King Wu was ashamed of it. This was the valor of King Wu. He also, by one display of his anger, gave repose to all the people of the kingdom. Let now your majesty also, in one burst of anger, give repose to all the people of the kingdom. The people are only afraid that your majesty does not love valor. The king Xuan of Cha had an interview with Mencius in the snow palace and said to him, "Do men of talents and worth likewise find pleasure in these things?" Mencius replied, "They do, and if people generally are not able to enjoy themselves, they condemn their superiors. For them, when they cannot enjoy themselves, to condemn their superiors is wrong. But when the superiors of the people do not make enjoyment a thing common to the people and themselves, they also do wrong. When a ruler rejoices in the joy of his people, they also rejoice in his joy. When he grieves at the sorrow of his people, they also grieve at his sorrow. A sympathy of joy will pervade the kingdom. A sympathy of sorrow will do the same. In such a state of things, it cannot be but that the ruler attain to the royal dignity." Formerly, the Duke Qing of Qi asked the minister Yan, saying, "I wish to pay a visit of inspection to Chuanfu and to Baowu, and then to bend my course southward along the shore till I come to Langye. What shall I do that my tour may be fit to be compared with the visits of inspection made by the ancient sovereigns?" The minister Yan replied, "An excellent inquiry. When the Son of Heaven visited the princes, it was called a tour of inspection, that is, be surveyed the states under their care. When the princes attended at the court of the Son of Heaven, it was called a report of office, that is, they reported their administration of their offices. Thus, neither of the proceedings was without a purpose. And moreover, in the spring they examined the plowing and supplied any deficiency of seed. In the autumn they examined the reaping and supplied any deficiency of yield. There is the saying of the Xia dynasty, 'If our king do not take his ramble, what will become of our happiness? If our king do not make his excursion, what will become of our help?' That ramble and that excursion were a pattern to the princes. Now, the state of things is different. A host marches in attendance on the ruler, and stores of provisions are consumed. The hungry are deprived of their food, and there is no rest for those who are called to toil. Maledictions are uttered by one to another with eyes askance, and the people proceed to the commission of wickedness. Thus the royal ordinances are violated, and the people are oppressed, and the supplies of food and drink flow away like water. The rulers yield themselves to the current, or they urge their way against it. They are wild, they are utterly lost. These things proceed to the grief of the inferior princes. Descending along with the current and forgetting to return is what I call yielding to it. Pressing up against it and forgetting to return is what I call urging their way against it. Pursuing the chase without satiety is what I call being wild. Delighting in wine without satiety is what I call being lost. The ancient sovereigns had no pleasures to which they gave themselves as on the flowing stream, no doings which might be so characterized as wild and lost. It is for you, my prince, to pursue your course." The Duke Qing was pleased. He issued a proclamation throughout his state, and went out and occupied a shed in the borders. From that time he began to open his granaries to supply the wants of the people, and calling the grand music master, he said to him, "Make for me music to suit a prince and his minister pleased with each other." And it was then that the Qishao and Qiushao were made, in the words to which it was said, "Is it a fault to restrain one's prince? He who restrains his prince loves his prince." The king Xuan of Qi said, "People all tell me to pull down and remove the hall of distinction. Shall I pull it down or stop the movement for that object?" Mencius replied, "The hall of distinction is a hall appropriate to the sovereigns. If your majesty wishes to practice the true royal government, then do not pull it down." The king said, "May I hear from you what the true royal government is?" Formerly, was the reply, King Wan's government of Qi was as follows. The husbandmen cultivated for the government 1/9 of the land. The descendants of officers were salaried. At the passes and in the markets, strangers were inspected, but goods were not taxed. There were no prohibitions respecting the ponds and weirs. The wives and children of criminals were not involved in their guilt. There were the old and wifeless, or widowers, the old and husbandless, or widows, the old and childless, or solitaries, the young and fatherless, or orphans. These 4 classes are the most destitute of the people, and have none to whom they can tell their wants. And King Wan, in the institution of his government with its benevolent action, made them the first objects of his regard, as it is said in the book of poetry, the rich may get through life well, but alas, for the miserable and solitary. The king said, "O excellent words." Mencius said, "Since your majesty deems them excellent, why do you not practice them?" "I have an infirmity," said the king. "I am fond of wealth." The reply was, "Formerly Kung Li was fond of wealth. It is said in the book of poetry, he reared his ricks and filled his granaries. He tied up dried provisions and grain in bottomless bags and sacks that he might gather his people together and glorify his state. With bows and arrows all displayed, with shields and spears and battle axes, large and small, he commenced his march. In this way, those who remained in their old seat had their ricks and granaries, and those who marched had their bags of provisions. It was not till after this that he thought he could begin his march. If your majesty loves wealth, give the people power to gratify the same feeling, and what difficulty will there be in your attaining the royal sway?" The king said, "I have an infirmity. I am fond of beauty." The reply was, "Formerly, King Tai was fond of beauty and loved his wife. It is said in the book of poetry, Ku Kung Tan Fu came in the morning, galloping his horse, by the banks of the western waters, as far as the foot of Chi Hill, along with the lady of Chiang. They came and together chose the site for their settlement. At that time, in the seclusion of the house, there were no dissatisfied women, and abroad there were no unmarried men. If your majesty loves beauty, let the people be able to gratify the same feeling, and what difficulty will there be in your attaining the royal sway?" Mencius said to the king Xuan of Qi, "Suppose that one of your majesty's ministers were to entrust his wife and children to the care of his friend, while he himself went into Chu to travel, and that, on his return, he should find that the friend had let his wife and children suffer from cold and hunger. How ought he to deal with him?" The king said, "He should cast him off." Mencius proceeded, "Suppose that the chief criminal judge could not regulate the officers under him. How would you deal with him?" The king said, "Dismiss him." Mencius again said, "If within the 4 borders of your kingdom there is not good government, what is to be done?" The king looked to the right and left and spoke of other matters. Mencius, having an interview with the king Xuan of Qi, said to him, "When men speak of an ancient kingdom, it is not meant thereby that it has lofty trees in it, but that it has ministers sprung from families which have been noted in it for generations. Your majesty has no intimate ministers even. Those whom you advanced yesterday are gone today, and you do not know it." The king said, "How shall I know that they have not ability, and so avoid employing them at all?" The reply was, "The ruler of a state advances to office men of talents and virtue only as a matter of necessity, since he will thereby cause the low to overstep the honorable, and distant to overstep his near relatives. Ought he to do so but with caution? When all those about you say, 'This is a man of talents and worth,' you may not therefore believe it. When your great officers all say, 'This is a man of talents and virtue,' neither may you for that believe it. When all the people say, 'This is a man of talents and virtue,' then examine into the case, and when you find that the man is such, employ him. When all those about you say, 'This man won't do,' don't listen to them. When all your great officers say, 'This man won't do,' don't listen to them. When the people all salve, 'This man won't do,' then examine into the case, and when you find that the man won't do, send him away. When all those about you say, 'This man deserves death,' don't listen to them. When all your great officers say, 'This man deserves death,' don't listen to them. When the people all say, 'This man deserves death,' then inquire into the case, and when you see that the man deserves death, put him to death. In accordance with this, we have the saying, the people killed him. You must act in this way in order to be the parent of the people. The king Xuan of Qi asked, saying, Was it so that Tang banished Qi and that King Wu smote Chao? Mencius replied, It is so in the records. The king said, May a minister then put his sovereign to death? Mencius said, He who outrages the benevolence proper to his nature is called a robber. He who outrages righteousness is called a ruffian. The robber and ruffian we call a mere fellow. I have heard of the cutting off of the fellow Shao, but I have not heard of the putting a sovereign to death in his case. Mencius, having an interview with the king Xuan of Qi, said to him, If you are going to build a large mansion, you will surely cause the master of the workmen to look out for large trees, and when he has found such large trees, you will be glad, thinking that they will answer for the intended object. Should the workmen hew them so as to make them too small, then your majesty will be angry, thinking that they will not answer for the purpose. Now a man spends his youth in learning the principles of right government, and being grown up to vigor, he wishes to put them in practice. If your majesty says to him, For the present put aside what you have learned, and follow me, what shall we say? Here now you have a gem unwrought in the stone. Although it may be worth 240,000 taels, you will surely employ a lapidary to cut and polish it. But when you come to the government of the state, then you say, For the present put aside what you have learned, and follow me. How is it that you herein act so differently from your conduct in calling in the lapidary to cut the gem? The people of Qi attacked Yen and conquered it. The king Xuan asked, saying, Some tell me not to take possession of it for myself, and some tell me to take possession of it. For a kingdom of 10,000 chariots, attacking another of 10,000 chariots, to complete the conquest of it in 50 days, is an achievement beyond mere human strength. If I do not take possession of it, calamities from heaven will surely come upon me. What do you say to my taking possession of it? Mencius replied, If the people of Yen will be pleased with your taking possession of it, then do so. Among the ancients there was one who acted on this principle, namely, King Wu. If the people of Yen will not be pleased with your taking possession of it, then do not do so. Among the ancients there was one who acted on this principle, namely King Wan. When, with all the strength of your country of 10,000 chariots, you attacked another country of 10,000 chariots, and the people brought baskets of rice and vessels of congee to meet your majesty's host, was there any other reason for this, but that they hoped to escape out of fire and water? If you make the water more deep and the fire more fierce, they will in like manner make another revolution. The people of Qi, having smitten Yen, took possession of it, and upon this the princes of the various states deliberated together and resolved to deliver Yen from their power. The king Xuan said to Mencius, The princes have formed many plans to attack me. How shall I prepare myself for them? Mencius replied, I have heard of one who with 70 li exercised all the functions of government throughout the kingdom. That was Tang. I have never heard of a prince with 1,000 li standing in fear of others. It is said in the book of history, as soon as Tang began his work of executing justice, he commenced with Ko. The whole kingdom had confidence in him. When he pursued his work in the east, the rude tribes on the west murmured. So did those on the north when he was engaged in the south. Their cry was, Why does he put us last? Thus the people looked to him, as we look in a time of great drought to the clouds and rainbows. The frequenters of the market stopped not. The husbandmen made no change in their operations. While he punished their rulers, he consoled the people. His progress was like the falling of opportune rain, and the people were delighted. It is said again in the book of history, We have waited for our prince long. The prince's coming will be our reviving. Now the ruler of Yen was tyrannizing over his people, and your majesty went and punished him. The people supposed that you were going to deliver them out of the water and the fire, and brought baskets of rice and vessels of congee to meet your majesty's host. But you have slain their fathers and elder brothers, and put their sons and younger brothers in confinement. You have pulled down the ancestral temple of the state and are removing to Qi its precious vessels. How can such a course be deemed proper? The rest of the kingdom is indeed jealously afraid of the strength of Qi. And now, when with a doubled territory you do not put in practice a benevolent government, it is this which sets the arms of the kingdom in motion. If your majesty will make haste to issue an ordinance, restoring your captives, old and young, stopping the removal of the precious vessels, and saying that, after consulting with the people of Yen, you will appoint them a ruler and withdraw from the country, in this way you may still be able to stop the threatened attack. There had been a brush between Cao and Lu when the Duke Mu asked Mencius, saying, "Of my officers there were killed 33 men, and none of the people would die in their defense. Though I sentenced them to death for their conduct, it is impossible to put such a multitude to death. If I do not put them to death, then there is the crime unpunished of their looking angrily on at the death of their officers, and not saving them. How is the exigency of the case to be met?" Mencius replied, "In calamitous years and years of famine, the old and weak of your people, who have been found lying in the ditches and water channels, and the able-bodied who have been scattered about to the four quarters, have amounted to several thousands. All the while, your granaries, O prince, have been stored with grain, and your treasuries and arsenals have been full, and not one of your officers has told you of the distress. Thus negligent have the superiors in your state been, and cruel to their inferiors. The philosopher Sang said, 'Beware, beware, what proceeds from you will return to you again.' Now at length the people have paid back the conduct of their officers to them. Do not you, O prince, blame them. If you will put in practice a benevolent government, this people will love you and all above them, and will die for their officers." The Duke Wan of Tang asked Mencius, saying, "Tang is a small kingdom, and lies between Qi and Chu. Shall I serve Qi, or shall I serve Chu?" Mencius replied, "This plan which you propose is beyond me. If you will have me counsel you, there is one thing I can suggest. Dig deeper your moats, build higher your walls, guard them as well as your people. In case of attack, be prepared to die in your defense, and have the people so that they will not leave you. This is a proper course." The Duke Wan of Tang asked Mencius, saying, "The people of Qi are going to fortify Xi. The movement occasions me great alarm. What is the proper course for me to take in the case?" Mencius replied, "Formerly, when King Tihai dwelt in Pin, the barbarians of the north were continually making incursions upon it. He therefore left it, went to the foot of Mount Qi, and there took up his residence. He did not take that situation as having selected it. It was a matter of necessity with him. If you do good among your descendants in after generations, there shall be one who will attain to the royal dignity. A prince lays the foundation of the inheritance, and hands down the beginning which he has made, doing what may be continued by his successors. As to the accomplishment of the great result, that is with heaven. What is that Qi to you, O prince? Be strong to do good. That is all your business." The Duke Wan of Tang asked Mencius, saying, "Tang is a small state. Though I do my utmost to serve those large kingdoms on either side of it, we cannot escape suffering from them. What course shall I take that we may do so?" Mencius replied, "Formerly, when King Tai dwelt in Pin, the barbarians of the north were constantly making incursions upon it. He served them with skins and silks, and still he suffered from them. He served them with dogs and horses, and still he suffered from them. He served them with pearls and gems, and still he suffered from them. Seeing this, he assembled the old men and announced to them, saying, 'What the barbarians want is my territory. I have heard this, that a ruler does not injure his people with that wherewith he nourishes them. My children, why should you be troubled about having no prince? I will leave this.' Accordingly, he left Pin, crossed the mountain Liang, built a town at the foot of Mount Qi, and dwelt there. The people of Pin said, 'He is a benevolent man. We must not lose him.' Those who followed him looked like crowds hastening to market. On the other hand, some say, 'The kingdom is a thing to be kept from generation to generation. One individual cannot undertake to dispose of it in his own person. Let him be prepared to die for it. Let him not quit it.' I ask you, Prince, to make your election between these two courses." The Duke Ping of Lu was about to leave his palace when his favorite, one Sang Chang, made a request to him, saying, On other days, when you have gone out, you have given instructions to the officers as to where you were going. But now, the horses have been put to the carriage, and the officers do not yet know where you are going. I venture to ask." The Duke said, "I am going to see the scholar Mang." "How is this?" said the other. "That you demean yourself, Prince, in paying the honor of the first visit to a common man, is, I suppose, because you think that he is a man of talents and virtue. By such men the rules of ceremonial proprieties and right are observed, but on the occasion of this Mang's second morning, his observances exceeded those of the former. Do not go to see him, my prince." The Duke said, "I will not." The officer Yo Chang entered the court and had an audience. He said, "Prince, why have you not gone to see Mang Ko?" The Duke said, "One told me that, on the occasion of the scholar Mang's second mourning, his observances exceeded those of the former. It is on that account that I have not gone to see him." "How is this?" answered Yo Chang. "By what you call exceeding, you mean, I suppose, that, on the first occasion, he used the rites appropriate to a scholar, and on the second, those appropriate to a great officer. That he first used 3 tripods and afterwards 5 tripods." The Duke said, "No, I refer to the greater excellence of the coffin, the shell, the grave clothes, and the shroud." Yo Chang said, "That cannot be called exceeding. That was the difference between being poor and being rich." After this, Yo Chang saw Mencius and said to him, "I told the prince about you, and he was consequently coming to see you, when one of his favorites, named Tsang Chang, stopped him, and therefore he did not come according to his purpose." Mencius said, "A man's advancement is effected, it may be, by others, and the stopping him is, it may be, from the efforts of others. But to advance a man or to stop his advance is really beyond the power of other men. My not finding in the Prince of Lu a ruler who would confide in me and put my counsels into practice is from heaven. How could that scion of the Tsang family cause me not to find the ruler that would suit me?" Part 5. Kung Sun Chao. Kung Sun Chao asked Mencius, saying, "Master, if you were to obtain the ordering of the government in Qi, could you promise yourself to accomplish anew such results as those realized by Quan Chung and Yen?" Mencius said, "You are indeed a true man of Qi. You know about Quan Chung and Yen, and nothing more." Someone asked Tsang Shi, saying, "Sir, to which do you give the superiority, to yourself or to Tse Lu?" Tsang Shi looked uneasy and said, "He was an object of veneration to my grandfather." "Then," pursued the other, "do you give the superiority to yourself or to Quan Chung?" Tsang Shi, flushed with anger and displeased, said, "How dare you compare me with Quan Chung? Considering how entirely Quan Chung possessed the confidence of his prince, how long he enjoyed the direction of the government of the state, and how low, after all, was what he accomplished, how is it that you liken me to him?" "Thus," concluded Mencius, "Tsang Shi would not play Quan Chung, and is it what you desire for me that I should do so?" Kung Sun Chao said, "Quan Chung raised his prince to be the leader of all the other princes, and Yen made his prince illustrious, and do you still think it would not be enough for you to do what they did?" Mencius answered, "To raise Qi to the royal dignity would be as easy as it is to turn round the hand." "So," returned the other, "the perplexity of your disciple is hereby very much increased. There was King Wan, moreover, with all the virtue which belonged to him, and who did not die till he had reached 100 years, and still his influence had not penetrated throughout the kingdom. It required King Wu and the Duke of Chao to continue his course, before that influence greatly prevailed. Now you say that the royal dignity might be so easily obtained. Is King Wan then not a sufficient object for imitation?" Mencius said, "How can King Wan be matched? From Tang to Wu Ting there had appeared 6 or 7 worthy and sage sovereigns. The kingdom had been attached to Yin for a long time, and this length of time made a change difficult. Wu Ting had all the princes coming to his court, and possessed the kingdom as if it had been a thing which he moved round in his palm. Then Chao was removed from Wu Ting by no great interval of time. There were still remaining some of the ancient families and of the old manners, of the influence also which had emanated from the earlier sovereigns, and of their good government. Moreover, there were the Viscount of Wei and his second son, their Royal Highnesses Pekan and the Viscount of Qi, and Cao Ko, all men of ability and virtue, who gave their joint assistance to Chao in his government. In consequence of these things, it took a long time for him to lose the throne. There was not a foot of ground which he did not possess. There was not one of all the people who was not his subject. So it was on his side, and King Wan at his beginning had only a territory of 100 square li. On all these accounts, it was difficult for him immediately to attain to the royal dignity. The people of Qi have a saying, "A man may have wisdom and discernment, but that is not like embracing the favorable opportunity. A man may have instruments of husbandry, but that is not like waiting for the farming seasons." The present time is one in which the royal dignity may be easily attained. In the flourishing periods of the Xia, Yin, and Chao dynasties, the royal domain did not exceed 1,000 li, and Qi embraces so much territory. Cocks crow and dogs bark to one another, all the way to the four borders of the state. So Qi possesses the people. No change is needed for the enlarging of its territory. No change is needed for the collecting of a population. If its ruler will put in practice a benevolent government, no power will be able to prevent his becoming sovereign. Moreover, never was there a time farther removed than the present from the rise of a true sovereign. Never was there a time when the sufferings of the people from tyrannical government were more intense than the present. The hungry readily partake of any food, and the thirsty of any drink. Confucius said, "The flowing progress of virtue is more rapid than the transmission of royal orders by stages and couriers." At the present time, in a country of 10,000 chariots, let benevolent government be put in practice, and the people will be delighted with it, as if they were relieved from hanging by the heels. With half the merit of the ancients, double their achievements is sure to be realized. It is only at this time that such could be the case. Kung Sun Chao asked Mencius, saying, "Master, if you were to be appointed a high noble and the prime minister of Qi, so as to be able to carry your principles into practice, though you should thereupon raise the ruler to the headship of all the other princes, or even to the royal dignity, it would not be to be wondered at. In such a position would your mind be perturbed or not?" Mencius replied, "No. At 40 I attained to an unperturbed mind." Chao said, "Since it is so with you, my master, you are far beyond Mang Pan." "The mere attainment," said Mencius, "is not difficult. The scholar Cao had attained to an unperturbed mind at an earlier period of life than I did." Chao asked, "Is there any way to an unperturbed mind?" The answer was, yes. Pi Kung Yu had this way of nourishing his valor. He did not flinch from any strokes at his body. He did not turn his eyes aside from any thrusts at them. He considered that the slightest push from anyone was the same as if he were beaten before the crowds in the marketplace, and that what he would not receive from a common man in his loose large garments of hair, neither should he receive from a prince of 10,000 chariots. He viewed stabbing a prince of 10,000 chariots just as stabbing a fellow dressed in cloth of hair. He feared not any of all the princes. A bad word addressed to him be always returned. Mengzi She had this way of nourishing his valor. He said, "I look upon not conquering and conquering in the same way. To measure the enemy and then advance, to calculate the chances of victory and then engage, this is to stand in awe of the opposing force. How can I make certain of conquering? I can only rise superior to all fear." Mengzi She resembled the philosopher Tsang. Pi Kung Yu resembled Sexia. I do not know to the valor of which of the two the superiority should be ascribed, but yet Mengzi She attended to what was of the greater importance. Formerly, the philosopher Tsang said to Tse, "Do you love valor? I heard an account of great valor from the master. It speaks thus: If, on self-examination, I find that I am not upright, shall I not be in fear even of a poor man in his loose garments of haircloth? If, on self-examination, I find that I am upright, I will go forward against thousands and tens of thousands." Yet what Mengzi She maintained, being merely his physical energy, was after all inferior to what the philosopher Tsang maintained, which was indeed of the most importance. Kung Sun Chao said, "May I venture to ask an explanation from you, master, of how you maintain an unperturbed mind, and how the philosopher Cao does the same?" Mencius answered, "Cao says, 'What is not attained in words is not to be sought for in the mind. What produces dissatisfaction in the mind is not to be helped by passion effort. This last, when there is unrest in the mind, not to seek for relief from passion effort, may be conceded. But not to seek in the mind for what is not attained in words cannot be conceded. The will is the leader of the passion nature. The passion nature pervades and animates the body. The will is first and chief, and the passion nature is subordinate to it. Therefore, I say, maintain firm the will and do no violence to the passion nature. Chao observed, since you say the will is chief and the passion nature is subordinate, how do you also say, maintain firm the will and do no violence to the passion nature? Mencius replied, when it is the will alone which is active, it moves the passion nature. When it is the passion nature alone which is active, it moves the will. For instance, now, in the case of a man falling or running, that is from the passion nature, and yet it moves the mind. I venture to ask, said Chao again, wherein you, master, surpass Cao. Mencius told him, I understand words. I am skillful in nourishing my vast, flowing passion nature. Chao pursued, I venture to ask what you mean by your vast, flowing passion nature. The reply was, it is difficult to describe it. This is the passion nature. It is exceedingly great and exceedingly strong. Being nourished by rectitude and sustaining no injury, it fills up all between heaven and earth. This is the passion nature. It is the mate and assistant of righteousness and reason. Without it, man is in a state of starvation. It is produced by the accumulation of righteous deeds. It is not to be obtained by incidental acts of righteousness. If the mind does not feel complacency in the conduct, the nature becomes starved. I therefore said, Cao has never understood righteousness because he makes it something external. There must be the constant practice of this righteousness, but without the object of thereby nourishing the passion nature. Let not the mind forget its work, but let there be no assisting the growth of that nature. Let us not be like the man of Sung. There was a man of Sung who was grieved that his growing corn was not longer, and so he pulled it up. Having done this, he returned home, looking very stupid, and said to his people, I am tired today. I have been helping the corn to grow long. His son ran to look at it, and found the corn all withered. There are few in the world who do not deal with their passion nature, as if they were assisting the corn to grow long. Some indeed consider it of no benefit to them, and let it alone. They do not weed their corn. They who assist it to grow long, pull out their corn. What they do is not only of no benefit to the nature, but it also injures it. Kung Sun Chao further asked, what do you mean by saying that you understand whatever words you hear? Mencius replied, when words are one-sided, I know how the mind of the speaker is clouded over. When words are extravagant, I know how the mind is fallen and sunk. When words are all depraved, I know how the mind has departed from principle. When words are evasive, I know how the mind is at its wit's end. These evils growing in the mind do injury to government, and displayed in the government are hurtful to the conduct of affairs. When a sage shall again arise, he will certainly follow my words. On this Chao observed, Cai Wo and Sekung were skillful in speaking. Zan Yu, the disciple Min, and Yen Yuan, while their words were good, were distinguished for their virtuous conduct. Confucius united the qualities of the disciples in himself, but still he said, in the matter of speeches, I am not competent. Then, master, have you attained to be a sage? Mencius said, oh, what words are these? Formerly Tsekung asked Confucius, saying, Master, are you a sage? Confucius answered him, a sage is what I cannot rise to. I learn without satiety and teach without being tired. Tsekung said, you learn without satiety, that shows your wisdom. You teach without being tired, that shows your benevolence. Benevolent and wise, Master, you are a sage. Now, since Confucius would not allow himself to be regarded as a sage, what words were those? Chao said, formerly, I once heard this. Sei Xia, Sei Yu, and Sei Chang had each one member of the sage. Zan Yu, the disciple Min, and Yen Yuan had all the members, but in small proportions. I venture to ask, with which of these are you pleased to rank yourself? Mencius replied, let us drop speaking about these, if you please. Chao then asked, what do you say of Poi and Yin? Their ways were different from mine, said Mencius. Not to serve a prince whom he did not esteem, nor command a people whom he did not approve. In a time of good government to take office, and on the occurrence of confusion to retire. This was the way of Po-yi. To say, "Whom may I not serve? My serving him makes him my ruler. What people may I not command? My commanding them makes them my people." In a time of good government to take office, and when disorder prevailed, also to take office. That was the way of Yin. When it was proper to go into office, then to go into it. When it was proper to keep retired from office, then to keep retired from it. When it was proper to continue in it long, then to continue in it long. When it was proper to withdraw from it quickly, then to withdraw quickly. That was the way of Confucius. These were all sages of antiquity, and I have not attained to do what they did. But what I wish to do is to learn to be like Confucius. Chao said, comparing Po-yi and Yin with Confucius, are they to be placed in the same rank? Mencius replied, no, since there were living men until now, there never was another Confucius. Chao said, then did they have any points of agreement with him? The reply was, yes. If they had been sovereigns over 100 li of territory, they would, all of them, have brought all the princes to attend in their court and have obtained the throne. And none of them, in order to obtain the throne, would have committed one act of unrighteousness or put to death one innocent person. In those things they agreed with him. Shao said, I venture to ask wherein he differed from them. Mencius replied, Sai Wo, Sei Kung, and Yu Zhou had wisdom sufficient to know the sage. Even had they been ranking themselves low, they would not have demeaned themselves to flatter their favorite. Now Tsai Wo said, according to my view of our master, he was far superior to Yao and Shun. Sei Kung said, by viewing the ceremonial ordinances of a prince, we know the character of his government. By hearing his music, we know the character of his virtue. After the lapse of 100 ages, I can arrange, according to their merits, the kings of 100 ages. Not one of them can escape me. From the birth of mankind till now, there has never been another like our master. Yu Zhou said, is it only among men that it is so? There is the Qilin among quadrupeds, the Fangwang among birds, the Tai Mountain among mounds and ant hills, and rivers and seas among rain pools. Though different in degree, they are the same in kind. So the sages among mankind are also the same in kind. But they stand out from their fellows and rise above the level, and from the birth of mankind till now, there never has been one so complete as Confucius. Part 6. On the benevolence of leaders. Mencius said, he who, using force, makes a pretense to benevolence is the leader of the princes. A leader of the princes requires a large kingdom. He who, using virtue, practices benevolence is the sovereign of the kingdom. To become the sovereign of the kingdom, a prince need not wait for a large kingdom. Tang did it with only 70 li, and King Wan with only 100. When one by force subdues men, they do not submit to him in heart. They submit because their strength is not adequate to resist. When one subdues men by virtue, in their heart's core they are pleased and sincerely submit, as was the case with the 70 disciples in their submission to Confucius. What is said in the book of poetry, from the west, from the east, from the south, from the north, there was not one who thought of refusing submission, is an illustration of this. Mencius said, benevolence brings glory to a prince, and the opposite of it brings disgrace. For the princes of the present day to hate disgrace and yet to live complacently doing what is not benevolent is like hating moisture and yet living in a low situation. If a prince hates disgrace, the best course for him to pursue is to esteem virtue and honor virtuous scholars, giving the worthiest among them places of dignity and the able offices of trust. When throughout his kingdom there is leisure and rest from external troubles, let him, taking advantage of such a season, clearly digest the principles of his government with its legal sanctions, and then even great kingdoms will be constrained to stand in awe of him. It is said in the book of poetry, before the heavens were dark with rain, I gathered the bark from the roots of the mulberry trees, and wove it closely to form the window and door of my nest. Now I thought, ye people below, perhaps you will not dare to insult me. Confucius said, did not he who made this ode understand the way of governing? If a prince is able rightly to govern his kingdom, who will dare to insult him? But now the princes take advantage of the time when throughout their kingdoms there is leisure and rest from external troubles, to abandon themselves to pleasure and indolent indifference. They in fact seek for calamities for themselves. Calamity and happiness in all cases are men's own seeking. This is illustrated by what is said in the book of poetry. Be always studious to be in harmony with the ordinances of God, so you will certainly get for yourself much happiness. And by the passage of the Tai Chia, when heaven sends down calamities, it is still possible to escape from them. When we occasion the calamities ourselves, it is not possible any longer to live. Mencius said, "If a ruler give honor to men of talents and virtue, and employ the able, so that offices shall all be filled by individuals of distinction and mark, then all the scholars of the kingdom will be pleased and wish to stand in his court. If, in the marketplace of his capital, he levy a ground rent on the shops but do not tax the goods, or enforce the proper regulations without levying a ground rent, then all the traders of the kingdom will be pleased and wish to store their goods in his marketplace. If, at his frontier passes, there be an inspection of persons, but no taxes charged on goods or other articles, then all the travelers of the kingdom will be pleased and wish to make their tours on his roads. If he require that the husbandmen give their mutual aid to cultivate the public feld, and exact no other taxes from them, then all the husbandmen of the kingdom will be pleased and wish to plow in his fields. If from the occupiers of the shops in his marketplace he do not exact the fine of the individual idler or of the hamlet's quota of cloth, then all the people of the kingdom will be pleased and wish to come and be his people. If a ruler can truly practice these 5 things, then the people in the neighboring kingdoms will look up to him as a parent. From the first birth of mankind till now, never has anyone led children to attack their parent and succeeded in his design. Thus, such a ruler will not have an enemy in all the kingdom, and he who has no enemy in the kingdom is the minister of heaven. Never has there been a ruler in such a case who did not attain to the royal dignity." Mencius said, "All men have a mind which cannot bear to see the sufferings of others." The ancient kings had this commiserating mind, and they, as a matter of course, had likewise a commiserating government. When with a commiserating mind was practiced a commiserating government, to rule the kingdom was as easy a matter as to make anything go round in the palm. When I say that all men have a mind which cannot bear to see the sufferings of others, my meaning may be illustrated thus. Even nowadays, if men suddenly see a child about to fall into a well, they will without exception experience a feeling of alarm and distress. They will feel so, not as a ground on which they may gain the favor of the child's parents, nor as a ground on which they may seek the praise of their neighbors and friends, nor from a dislike to the reputation of having been unmoved by such a thing. From this case, we may perceive that the feeling of commiseration is essential to man, that the feeling of shame and dislike is essential to man, that the feeling of modesty and complaisance is essential to man, and that the feeling of approving and disapproving is essential to man. The feeling of commiseration is the principle of benevolence. The feeling of shame and dislike is the principle of righteousness. The feeling of modesty and complaisance is the principle of propriety. The feeling of approving and disapproving is the principle of knowledge. Men have these 4 principles just as they have their 4 limbs. When men, having these 4 principles, yet say of themselves that they cannot develop them, they play the thief with themselves. And he who says of his prince that he cannot develop them plays the thief with his prince. Since all men have these 4 principles in themselves, let them know to give them all their development and completion, and the issue will be like that of fire which has begun to burn, or that of a spring which has begun to find vent. Let them have their complete development, and they will suffice to love and protect all within the 4 seas. Let them be denied that development, and they will not suffice for a man to serve his parents with. Mencius said, "Is the arrow-maker less benevolent than the maker of armor of defense? And yet, the arrow-maker's only fear is lest men should not be hurt, and the armor-maker's only fear is lest men should be hurt. So it is with the priest and the coffin-maker. The choice of a profession, therefore, is a thing in which great caution is required." Confucius said, "It is virtuous manners which constitute the excellence of a neighborhood, If a man, in selecting a residence, do not fix on one where such prevail, how can he be wise? Now, benevolence is the most honorable dignity conferred by heaven, and the quiet home in which man should dwell. Since no one can hinder us from being so, if yet we are not benevolent, this is being not wise. From the want of benevolence and the want of wisdom will ensue the entire absence of propriety and righteousness. He who is in such a case must be the servant of other men. To be the servant of men and yet ashamed of such servitude is like a bowmaker's being ashamed to make bows, or an arrow-maker's being ashamed to make arrows. If he be ashamed of his case, his best course is to practice benevolence. The man who would be benevolent is like the archer. The archer adjusts himself and then shoots. If he misses, he does not murmur against those who surpass himself. He simply turns round and seeks the cause of his failure in himself. Mencius said, "When anyone told Selu that he had a fault, he rejoiced. When Yu heard good words, he bowed to the speaker. The great Shun had a still greater delight in what was good. He regarded virtue as the common property of himself and others, giving up his own way to follow that of others, and delighting to learn from others to practice what was good. From the time when he plowed and sowed, exercised the potter's art, and was a fisherman, to the time when he became emperor, he was continually learning from others. To take example from others to practice virtue is to help them in the same practice. Therefore, there is no attribute of the superior man greater than his helping men to practice virtue." Mencius said, "Poe would not serve a prince whom he did not approve, nor associate with a friend whom he did not esteem. He would not stand in a bad prince's court, nor speak with a bad man. To stand in a bad prince's court, or to speak with a bad man, would have been to him the same as to sit with his court robes and court cap amid mire and ashes." Pursuing the examination of his dislike to what was evil, we find that he thought it necessary, if he happened to be standing with a villager whose cap was not rightly adjusted, to leave him with a high air, as if he were going to be defiled. Therefore, although some of the princes made application to him with very proper messages, he would not receive their gifts. He would not receive their gifts, counting it inconsistent with his purity to go to them. Hui of Lucia was not ashamed to serve an impure prince, nor did he think it low to be an inferior officer. When advanced to employment, he did not conceal his virtue, but made it a point to carry out his principles. When neglected and left without office, he did not murmur. When straitened by poverty, he did not grieve. Accordingly, he had a saying, "You are you, and I am I. Although you stand by my side with breast and aims bare, or with your body naked, how can you defile me?" Therefore, self-possessed, he companied with men indifferently, at the same time not losing himself. When he wished to leave, if pressed to remain in office, he would remain. He would remain in office when pressed to do so, not counting it required by his purity to go away. Mencius said, "Poe was narrow-minded, and Hui of Lucia was wanting in self-respect. The superior man will not manifest either narrow-mindedness or the want of self-respect." Part 7. Kung Sun Chao. Mencius said, "Opportunities of time vouchsafed by heaven are not equal to advantages of situation afforded by the earth, and advantages of situation afforded by the earth are not equal to the union arising from the accord of men. There is a city with an inner wall of 3 li in circumference and an outer wall of 7. The enemy surround and attack it, but they are not able to take it. Now, to surround and attack it, there must have been vouchsafed to them by heaven the opportunity of time, and in such case, their not taking it is because opportunities of time vouchsafed by heaven are not equal to advantages of situation afforded by the earth. There is a city whose walls are distinguished for their height, and whose moats are distinguished for their depth, where the arms of its defenders, offensive and defensive, are distinguished for their strength and sharpness, and the stores of rice and other grain are very large. Yet it is obliged to be given up and abandoned. This is because advantages of situation afforded by the earth are not equal to the union arising from the accord of men. In accordance with these principles, it is said, a people is bounded in, not by the limits of dikes and borders. A state is secured, not by the strengths of mountains and rivers. The kingdom is overawed, not by the sharpness and strength of arms. He who finds the proper course has many to assist him. He who loses the proper course has few to assist him. When this, the being assisted by few, reaches its extreme point, his own relations revolt from the prince. When the being assisted by many reaches its highest point, the whole kingdom becomes obedient to the prince. When one to whom the whole kingdom is prepared to be obedient attacks those from whom their own relations revolt, what must be the result? Therefore, the true ruler will prefer not to fight, but if he do fight, he must overcome. As Mencius was about to go to court to see the king sent a person to him with this message: I was wishing to come and see you, but I have got a cold and may not expose myself to the wind. In the morning I will hold my court. I do not know whether you will give me the opportunity of seeing you then. Mencius replied, Unfortunately, I am unwell and not able to go to the court. Next day, he went out to pay a visit of condolence to some one of the Tungquo family, when Kung Sun Chao said to him, Yesterday, you declined going to the court on the ground of being unwell, and today you are going to pay a visit of condolence. May this not be regarded as improper? Yesterday, said Mencius, I was unwell. Today I am better. Why should I not pay this visit? In the meantime, the king sent a messenger to inquire about his sickness, and also a physician. Mengzi replied to them, Yesterday, when the king's order came, he was feeling a little unwell and could not go to the court. Today he was a little better and hastened to go to court. I do not know whether he can have reached it by this time or not. Having said this, he sent several men to look for Mencius on the way and say to him, I beg that, before you return home, you will go to the court. On this, Mencius felt himself compelled to go to Qing Chao's and there stop the night. Mr. Qing said to him, In the family, there is the relation of father and son. Abroad, there is the relation of prince and minister. These are the two great relations among men. Between father and son, the ruling principle is kindness. Between prince and minister, the ruling principle is respect. I have seen the respect of the king to you, sir, but I have not seen in what way you show respect to him. Mencius replied, Oh, what words are these? Among the people of Qi there is no one who speaks to the king about benevolence and righteousness. Are they thus silent because they do not think that benevolence and righteousness are admirable? No, but in their hearts they say, This man is not fit to be spoken with about benevolence and righteousness. Thus they manifest a disrespect than which there can be none greater. I do not dare to set forth before the king any but the ways of Yao and Shun. There is therefore no man of Qi who respects the king so much as I do. Mr. Qing said, Not so. That was not what I meant. In the Book of Rights it is said, When a father calls, the answer must be without a moment's hesitation. When the prince's order calls, the carriage must not be waited for. You were certainly going to the court, but when you heard the king's order, then you did not carry your purpose out. This does seem as if it were not in accordance with that rule of propriety. Mencius answered him, How can you give that meaning to my conduct? The philosopher Sang said, The wealth of Qin and Chu cannot be equaled. Let their rulers have their wealth. I have my benevolence. Let them have their nobility. I have my righteousness. Wherein should I be dissatisfied as inferior to them? Now shall we say that these sentiments are not right? Seeing that the philosopher Sang spoke them, there is in them, I apprehend, a real principle. In the kingdom there are three things universally acknowledged to be honorable. Nobility is one of them, age is one of them, virtue is one of them. In courts, nobility holds the first place of the three. In villages, age holds the first place. And for helping one's generation and presiding over the people, the other two are not equal to virtue. How can the possession of only one of these be presumed on to despise one who possesses the other two? Therefore, a prince who is to accomplish great deeds will certainly have ministers whom he does not call to go to him. When he wishes to consult with them, he goes to them. The prince who does not honor the virtuous and delight in their ways of doing, to this extent, is not worth having to do with. Accordingly, there was the behavior of Tang Tui Yin. He first learned of him, and then employed him as his minister, and so without difficulty he became sovereign. There was the behavior of the Duke Huan to Quan Chung. He first learned of him, and then employed him as his minister. and so without difficulty he became chief of all the princes. Now throughout the kingdom, the territories of the princes are of equal extent, and in their achievements they are on a level. Not one of them is able to exceed the others. This is from no other reason but that they love to make ministers of those whom they teach, and do not love to make ministers of those by whom they might be taught. So did Tang behave to Yi Yin and the Duke Huan to Quan Chung, that they would not venture to call them to go to them. If Quan Chung might not be called to him by his prince, how much less may he be called, who would not play the part of Quan Chung? Chanxin asked Mencius, saying, "Formerly, when you were in Qi, the king sent you a present of 2,400 taels of fine silver, and you refused to accept it. When you were in Sung, 1,680 taels were sent to you, which you accepted, and when you were in Xie, 2,1200 taels were sent, which you likewise accepted. If your declining to accept the gift in the first case was right, your accepting it in the latter cases was wrong. If your accepting it in the latter cases was right, your declining to do so in the first case was wrong. You must accept, master, one of these alternatives." Mencius said, "I did right in all the cases. When I was in Sung, I was about to take a long journey. Travelers must be provided with what is necessary for their expenses. The prince's message was, a present against traveling expenses. Why should I have declined the gift? When I was in Xi, I was apprehensive for my safety and taking measures for my protection. The message was, I have heard that you are taking measures to protect yourself and send this to help you in procuring arms. Why should I have declined the gift? But when I was in Qi, I had no occasion for money. To send a man a gift when he has no occasion for it is to bribe him. How is it possible that a superior man should be taken with a bribe?" Mencius, having gone to Pinglu, addressed the governor of it, saying, "If one of your spearmen should lose his place in the ranks 3 times in one day, would you, sir, put him to death or not?" "I would not wait for 3 times to do so," was the reply. Mencius said, "Well then, you, sir, have likewise lost your place in the ranks many times. In bad calamitous years and years of famine, the old and feeble of your people, who have been found lying in the ditches and water channels, and the able-bodied, who have been scattered about to the 4 quarters, have amounted to several thousand." The governor replied, "That is a state of things in which it does not belong to me choosing to act." "Here," said Mencius, "is a man who receives charge of the cattle and sheep of another and undertakes to feed them for him. Of course, he must search for pasture ground and grass for them. If, after searching for those, he cannot find them, will he return his charge to the owner, or will he stand by and see them die?" "Herein," said the officer, "I am guilty." Another day, Mencius had an audience of the king and said to him, "Of the governors of your majesty's cities I am acquainted with 5, but the only one of them who knows his faults is Confucian." He then repeated the conversation to the king, who said, "In this matter, I am the guilty one." Mencius said to Qi Hua, "There seemed to be reason in your declining the governorship of Ling Qiu and requesting to be appointed chief criminal judge, because the latter office would afford you the opportunity of speaking your views. Now several months have elapsed, and have you yet found nothing of which you might speak?" On this, Qi Hua remonstrated on some matter with the king, and, his counsel not being taken, resigned his office and went away. The people of Qi said, "In the course which he marked out for Qi Hua he did well, but we do not know as to the course which he pursues for himself." His disciple Kung Tu told him these remarks. Mencius said, "I have heard that he who is in charge of an office, when he is prevented from fulfilling its duties, ought to take his departure, and that he on whom is the responsibility of giving his opinion, when he finds his words unattended to, ought to do the same. But I am in charge of no office. On me devolves no duty of speaking out my opinion. May not I therefore act freely and without any constraint, either in going forward or in retiring?" Kung Sun Chao said to Mencius, "The position of a high dignitary of Qi is not a small one. The road from Qi to Tang is not short. How was it that during all the way there and back, you never spoke to Huan about the matters of your mission?" Mencius replied, "There were the proper officers who attended to them. What occasion had I to speak to him about them?" Our audiobook ends here. Thank you for listening. If you want any particular book on this channel, please let us know in the comments.